Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI, and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of thebreaker.news, Bob Mackin. You can find his website, thebreaker.ca. Bob, is it possible that people of Richmond could elect a mayor who denies that there are human rights abuses in China?
It is very possible. Depends who gets out to vote. Hong Guo is a real estate and immigration lawyer who is running for mayor, the most serious challenge that Malcolm Brody, the incumbent mayor, has had in years. Brody won a by-election in 2001 after Greg Halsey-Brandt went into provincial politics with the BC Liberals, and Malcolm Brody has been the mayor ever since of Richmond during a great time of change. He is hoping to win this and then become the longest-serving mayor in Richmond's history. This is a community of a couple 100,000 people. It's seen so many changes since the 1990s when the big wave of Hong Kong migration happened. A lot of people from Hong Kong decided to make Richmond their home, either their current home or their future home, because they were scared of China. They saw what happened with the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, 1989, and they were worried about the future of Hong Kong after the 1997 handover from Britain to China, where Hong Kong was supposed to be a special administrative region, one country, two systems. It was supposed to retain for half century or so its way of life there, of being a financial center, a place where the borders were largely open to free trade, low taxes, and a high degree of autonomy and freedom of speech. But that's changed in recent years, among many things, where China has, under Xi Jinping, the current president, decided to flex its muscles and become more powerful. And they have someone who appears to be an ally in Richmond who wants to become the new mayor of Richmond, Hong Guo. There's never been a Chinese mayor in Richmond. There's never been a female mayor in Richmond. She'd become someone historic. But she also, when I sat down and interviewed her after the October 2nd All Candidates meeting, said some things that should alarm people who live in Richmond, whether they're Chinese ethnic origin or not. Because what she said when I asked her some questions was very anti-democratic and very oblivious to all the news headlines we get from Western media stationed in China and from all the non-governmental associations who are recognized by bigger entities such as the United Nations. I sat down with her and asked her about her platform, because her platform and her logo, for instance, her logo shows a bridge. She, of course, is very much in favor of a bridge to replace the Massey Tunnel. She also says she wants to build bridges between Richmond and China. And the question I had for her was, well, Richmond and China seem to be pretty close together as it is. The airport is there. It's a municipality with, of course, large groups, large neighborhoods of Chinese who've moved over and made it their home and made it a place to do business as well. And do you really need to foster closer ties with China, especially when there's people in the Hong Kong community in Richmond and people in the Taiwanese community in Richmond who don't want to see their homelands come any closer to China because of what China is. It's the world's biggest country, but it's also the world's biggest police state and surveillance state. I asked her about that, about why she would want to bring Richmond closer to China when there are people there that say they don't want to be closer to China, especially on the issue of human rights. And she went off on a tangent, essentially, and said that, and answered all of my questions, or at least to the best of her ability or willingness, that that she says that China does not have a human rights problem. And she said that there's freedom of speech for the media to operate in China and to criticize the Chinese government, which is contrary to what groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch say. They have seen the ability of journalists to do the things that Hong Guo says not exist at all. There are serious human rights problems that are happening right now in Xinjiang in the far west of China. It's the province where there is a very large Muslim population, and the Chinese government has rounded people up by the tens of thousands and put them in re-education camps. That's their way of trying to prevent Muslim unrest, to prevent there from being terrorist attacks. That's at least the thinking of Beijing. And these people are being taken away against their will, with no evidence that they do mean ill will towards anyone in their communities or towards the government. And I asked her about that, and she said, no, it doesn't exist. Have you seen it? Well, I have seen the international news reports. Wall Street Journal, New York Times have covered it. 60 Minutes has covered it. And the United Nations, back in August, issued a warning to China. They poo-pooed this. They said that this should not be happening, and the Chinese government basically denied that it's happening and attacked the credibility of those who have evidence that says it is happening. I even asked her questions about journalists being jailed in China, and she didn't think that exists. I asked her about some big names in the news in the last couple of years. Liu Xiaobo, who was a human rights activist who won a Nobel Peace Prize. He eventually died. His wife, earlier this year, got out of China and moved into exile in Germany. And she played ignorance on that question, and she played ignorance when I asked her about Ai Weiwei. Ai Weiwei is a very famous Chinese avant-garde artist who has most recently made a film about refugees around the world. His art is seen around the world, and his art is basically from the standpoint of poking an eye at authority. He's no friend of Xi Jinping, and yet he is someone who is very proud of being someone of Chinese origin. He was the co-designer of the Bird's Nest Stadium that was built for the 2008 Olympics, but he most recently had his art studio in Beijing torn down by government officials. And again, I asked her about him, and she played ignorant, which is all very, very unsettling that someone in Canada, where we do have protections in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for freedom of speech, we've got the rule of law, and we've got freedom of speech, freedom of the press that are enshrined in our Constitution, and you've got someone who wants to become the mayor of a very important suburb here on the west coast of Canada who is denying that one of the world's biggest human rights offenders is a human rights offender.
Did you ask her about Falun Gong members?
Didn't get that far. If I could have asked her a whole shopping list of all the human rights abuses in Chinese history, we could have been there for a while, and that would have been brave of her to do so. But her handlers, a fellow named Wolfgang Richter and another fellow named Peter Schellenberg, both stopped the interview and hustled her out of there. And Peter Schellenberg stood in my way to prevent me from actually leaving the building, because I was trying to get a little bit closer to her, just enough in earshot to ask her a few more questions. She is being sued for $13 million over a collapsed real estate deal in Richmond, and I wanted to find out if she had submitted her defense statement yet, and if she had any comment on that. That's a very serious matter. The Richmond News recently reported on it, and there's two sides to every legal dispute, and she is a lawyer. She's a real estate and immigration lawyer, and I wanted to find out her stance on that lawsuit, as well as if she had actually filed into the court her defense statement. And no, I was prevented from getting within earshot to try to ask that question and to get an answer on that. I would have asked her so many other things about some of the work she's doing with Chinese companies. I'd like to know more about that. I'd like to know if she's going to release her list of donors. I'd like to find out who is putting money into her campaign so she can buy signs and newspaper ads. That's something that's very important. Of course, Elections BC says candidates in this election, the October 20th elections in BC, have until, I think it's about 90 days after the election to disclose. But in Vancouver, major parties are voluntarily disclosing before Election Day their lists, just so voters can see who is supporting these parties. I think that's a responsible thing to do, especially in this day and age when there are many questions, not just the media, but the public has about money in politics and how money influences politicians and their decisions and who they're really loyal to. Is it the citizen or is it their donor? So I wasn't able to get an answer to that question either. This is someone in Richmond, Hong Guo, who is right now under a cloud, a couple of serious clouds. She's got that one lawsuit I talked about earlier. She's also been accused by the Law Society of British Columbia of professional misconduct relating to trust funds and how her law firm handled money of clients. That's a serious allegation. It's unproven. It needs to go before a hearing. And she has to have a chance in that hearing to put her side forward. But if she loses that hearing, she could be disbarred. She could be kicked out of the legal profession. She could be subject to serious fines. She also has a law license, she says, in Saskatchewan. So if she loses this election and isn't allowed to operate as a lawyer in BC, maybe she could go and be a lawyer in Saskatchewan. But we'll be watching this very closely to see what Richmond residents do, because Richmond has some serious issues that are different from other municipalities. Not just housing in Richmond, but there's issues of cultural harmony. This is a community where people have complained about the lack of English on signs, a community where people have complained about the proliferation of birth houses, about birth tourism, about people paying large sums of cash to have their babies and get instant passports by having their babies at Richmond Hospital and staying for weeks and maybe months before and afterwards in houses in Richmond, and getting that instant passport, going back to their homeland, mostly going back to China, and then being eligible to enjoy the social safety net years from now for their children. So those issues do require some provincial and federal help, but that there's been outcries from now the English-speaking minority in Richmond to try to get solutions, because they want to live in functioning neighborhoods and enjoy multiculturalism. But it seems like there's been a step back taken on multiculturalism, which has got a lot of people in Richmond unhappy, and they haven't been very happy with Malcolm Brody, the current mayor, and the current council for rubber stamping very large mansions on farmland. People have been able to buy farmland for very cheap and build the dream houses that could be the size of an apartment building for their families. And that's also an issue there, of the use of agricultural land or the encroachment of agricultural land with residential development. So you've got a community that's really in flux, a community that needs some harmony right now. But you've got one of the candidates who's hoping to knock off the incumbent, who is someone who, in the land of her birth, says everything's tickety-boo.
Is there any suspicion or feelings that she could be a Chinese operative?
That is out there on social media. People who've responded to my story are questioning that, saying that she very well could be, because the language that she used in the interview that we had dovetails with the language that you hear from China these days in the Xi Jinping era. There is an arm of the Chinese Communist government called the United Front Work Department, and its job is to encourage Chinese culture and customs and also political influence in countries around the world where there are especially large Chinese populations. And that is very troubling. The United States government, Canadian government, sees this, they published reports on that, expressing some reservations about things like the Confucius Institute language schools, which there's some here in British Columbia, business associations which have close ties to consulates, and high-level delegations that have visited places like British Columbia. There was a conference back in May for the overseas Chinese who have their roots in Guangdong province, and one of the people that came to that meeting was actually the vice chair of the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party. It's not just about increasing trade and tourism and being friendly to your worldwide neighbors. China has some goals of becoming a superpower, and United Front Work Department is one of the ways that is being manifested.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of Powerband Solutions. Powerband is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. Powerband Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, you had a chance to speak with a candidate for Vancouver mayor's, the mayorship, and that would be, I think, David Chen. What did he have to say that stood out for you?
Well, he's the pro-Vancouver party candidate, really someone who is quite a centrist on many issues, but someone who is also concerned about the well-being of people who are Vancouverites who've grown up here, people like him. He said that Vancouver is the only place he knows is home, and is concerned about the way the city is going, especially with the power of developers at City Hall who've enjoyed so many years under Vision Vancouver of essentially dictating to City Hall how they want it to be, and of course funding very large political campaigns. Vision Vancouver, that era is almost over, and the era of big money is supposedly over, but we've seen what's happened this year with the funding of Hector Bremner billboards by Peter Wall, the major developer, and we're also seeing the way that the money is flowing still into political party pockets, although a little bit less money still from people in the development industry. So he's very concerned about that, especially the foreign money that has displaced local residents, and also permanent residents, people who have come to Vancouver to be part of the community, to work and live in the community, who want to contribute as well, but they're even finding it hard to make it go here in the city, which has become one of the most expensive in the world. So he's very concerned about that and says that there should be a new citywide plan to, instead of have these spot rezonings around the city where a developer chooses to make a big investment, the city should be given a chance to look at everything as a whole, put everything on the table and say, where do you want to go with Vancouver in the next 20, 40, 60, 100 years? He's also concerned about the plan to build the Broadway Subway, which is approaching $3 billion to go as far as Arbutus, when he believes other technologies should be looked at, given a second chance. There is a school of thought that says there should be an LRT built all the way to UBC for less than $3 billion. That can be done, and much quicker than boring a couple of tunnels under Broadway. David Chen suggested another way, that maybe some high-volume, hydrogen-powered buses, for instance, could still be used on the route. There could be an investment there for green energy, low-emitting vehicles that could still do the job. But again, it's not a done deal. The procurement hasn't started. The money isn't all together yet, hasn't all been given the rubber stamp by all levels of governments, even though they've had their press conferences and photo ops. There still is time, because the Broadway Subway, as it's planned, would change the face of the city, would add more high-rises, and wouldn't actually be the best decision for city buildings. Says people like David Chen, like Colleen Hardwick, who's running for the council with the NPA, Patrick Condon, the UBC professor who was going to be Cope's mayoral candidate. He had to drop out in July after suffering a minor stroke, but his voice is still out there resonating within the election campaign. But you do have Vision Vancouver still pushing the subway and pushing this aspirational plan to get the subway to UBC, even though there have not been any serious engineering plans or financial talks among funders to make that happen. It really is interesting how this has taken so long to get this far, and it's been pushed by Vision Vancouver especially and the federal Liberals, maybe more for political reasons, just to get something done and to try to meet their climate goals. But is this the best expenditure of money for Vancouverites, especially Vancouverites who are screaming out for better transportation, faster transit, and connections to places like UBC, but they really want to speed forward and build that $3 billion all the way to Arbutus with no assurance that it will ever go further than Arbutus, because you've got other municipalities in the Lower Mainland who are screaming out for rapid transit. You've got the situation in Surrey and Langley, of course. Surrey is supposed to get LRT, but some in that campaign want to change to SkyTrain. And now you've got North Vancouver and West Vancouver. The North Shore has had some studies in transportation and say that time is now to build an LRT between Ambleside and Phibbs Exchange. The traffic jams in the North Shore are astounding, and there's a lot of people there that are saying that North Shore needs to get its fair share. So if you build it to Arbutus, will we ever see anything beyond Arbutus as a subway? And the big question mark that needs to be answered, but it could be answered pretty quickly if they decided to switch gears and go for LRT.
And should there not be a subway between Vancouver itself under Burrard Inlet to the North Shore?
That's another idea. There's been that idea. There's been an idea of a gondola between downtown and North Vancouver. There's a lot of ideas. Some ideas are more feasible than others. It'd be very expensive to bore a tunnel for rapid transit underneath the Burrard Inlet. Tunnel boring in these parts is easier said than done. We've got to look at the example from the Tri-Cities. The Evergreen line was delayed by more than 6 months because the tunnel boring machine there found some surprise conditions, some surprise aquifers, some surprise mud where there wasn't supposed to be mud and rock where there wasn't supposed to be rock. And that ground the tunnel boring machine to a halt. And we still never had a real solid independent accounting for that project, but that was SNC-Lavalin was the contractor there. And the same company that built the Canada Line, same company that's been involved in every single phase of SkyTrain in one shape or form. Same company out of Montreal has been subject of international headlines over corruption. And the latest headlines there is the federal government doesn't want to negotiate a settlement with them. The federal government wants to continue a prosecution against SNC-Lavalin. And they would be the most logical bidder for the Broadway Subway. And of course, it would make their shareholders happy if that plan stays on track. So you've got various elements of industry. You've got SNC-Lavalin, a very large engineering company, which obviously has an interest in seeing the Broadway Subway happen. It would have to go through the procurement process to get all its ducks in order. And of course, you got the real estate industry and the construction industry, which wants to see billions of dollars spent and leveraged as well. So, yeah, here you are with this subway talk in Vancouver, which with just over a week to go before Election Day isn't getting much attention, whereas in Surrey, it's the talk of the town, where you've got Doug McCallum trying to make a comeback as mayor of Surrey, really pushing the SkyTrain, and you've got Tom Gill from the Surrey First Party who's taking over from Linda Hepner, in wanting to get her job as mayor, staying true to LRT, which Surrey City Hall wants to use to build the city of Surrey instead of build another connection to another suburb. They want to take control and stop the sprawl.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
Vatic Ventures Corp. is a potash exploration company focused on the Korat Basin in Thailand, the world's largest undeveloped potash resource. Vatic's management has extensive potash exploration and development experience in Thailand. Vatic will have marketing advantage compared to Western producers. Drill program commences this spring. Vatic trades on the TSX Venture, symbol VCV, and on Frankfurt, symbol V8V2. Visit our website, vaticventures.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, you dug up something. It seems Hector Bremner, international man of mystery behind Christy Clark.
Indeed. The narrative about Hector Bremner all along has been that he was close aide to Rich Coleman, the deputy premier under the BC Liberal administration of Christy Clark, the Minister of Natural Gas and responsible for housing. Hector Bremner was working as an aide for Rich Coleman for a period of time. He also worked as an aide for Naomi Yamamoto, as well as Teresa Watt, the International Trade Minister. This is all after the 2013 election where he ran as BC Liberal candidate in New Westminster. Didn't make a dent in that riding, which is solid NDP, but he got rewarded for his efforts with a job in government as an aide to several ministers, and most notably as Rich Coleman's aide. Now, it turns out, as I was able to find out from seeing documents and talking to people who are current and former BC Liberal members, some of whom have worked directly with him, that he was involved quite heavily in the 2011 leadership race, the leadership race that resulted in Christy Clark beating Kevin Falcon to become the leader of the BC Liberal Party and the premier taking over from Gordon Campbell. And these documents include email from Harry Bloy. Now, Harry Bloy was an MLA in Burnaby and Coquitlam for a number of years in the BC Liberals. He was the only MLA in the caucus at the time in 2011, early 2011, that actually supported Christy Clark. And so Hector Bremner was working in the Burnaby and New Westminster ridings as an organizer, essentially helping organize the campaign, get volunteers and sell memberships. That's what is done during these campaigns. And during the last weekend of the campaign, email back and forth, this one email from Harry Bloy, he received an email from one of his connections in this campaign, an email of 77 PIN numbers, and another email of 22 PIN numbers. The PIN numbers were used by BC Liberal members to dial in to a special phone line or go online to a special website, put in the PIN numbers, and then get a chance to vote for the new leader of the party. Now, the interesting part is that the PIN numbers were mentioned when David Butcher, the special prosecutor, went to court earlier this year for the sentencing hearing of Brian Bonney, the BC Liberal operative, and surprised everyone by confirming that the investigation did also include investigation of the voting improprieties around the 2011 leadership campaign. And he said that what was happening was block voting by proxy, and the party had actually not made it against the rules. So Harry Bloy was able to find a way to go through a loophole, gather as many PIN numbers as possible, and distribute them to people who were not necessarily party members. We don't exactly know who they were distributed to because this was never tested in court. Harry Bloy, court heard, had not agreed to be interviewed by the RCMP detectives or David Butcher, through his lawyer, and ostensibly he would have been on the stand had this trial gone forward, but there was a plea bargain by Brian Bonney, eventually sentenced to 9 months in jail. But there is this open question of what what was going on in that leadership campaign, and if this PIN number situation had not happened, could Kevin Falcon have become the Premier of British Columbia, the new Liberal leader, instead of Christy Clark? So these two emails, Harry Bloy sent email to Mark Robertson, the BC Liberal operative, Lauren Maincourt, a former MLA in the BC Liberal caucus, and Hector Bremner. So Bremner's name is on these two emails that contain multiple PIN numbers, and the question I haven't got answered because Hector Bremner hasn't responded to me, and I've tried him and his campaign staff as well to find out. I'd like to get to his side of the story. But when I did the story, after trying several times to get his comment, I put it out there that we don't know what happened with those PIN numbers after they were emailed to those two people, plus Hector Bremner at his company called Touch Marketing. We can only speculate of what happened, but there's no confirmation of what happened. But the best source I had told me that Bremner had actually not cooperated with the investigation, that he was not interviewed by the RCMP. Question would have been, would he have testified and been called to testify if this had gone to court and there had been a trial? Don't know. But I think it's something that's important for voters to know as they go to the polls. Advanced voting's already started. October 20th is election date. Do you want someone as mayor who has been involved in some unusual political circumstances in the past, someone who did not agree to be interviewed by me to take my questions to tell me what really went on when he was involved in the BC Liberal leadership race of 2011? Did he eventually get interviewed by the RCMP? A lot of questions that I have for Hector Bremner. I think he owes it to the public to answer those questions. This is the ultimate job interview. Someone wanting to become mayor, the ultimate job interview. You really should be as open as can be at all times and answer all questions from reporters, especially ones as serious as this, to clear the air. Because being mayor of a city is a big responsibility. With a $1.4 billion budget, he'd become the head of the police board by being mayor, and also he'd be someone that we look forward to or look to in times of need. If there is a major criminal incident, if there is a major natural disaster, the mayor becomes a very important person to keep civic government going in times of crisis, and also someone that we would need to keep the city and its spirits up. So serious questions there about Hector Bremner and his political past that really demand answers.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, the publisher of thebreaker.news. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.